Welcome to Feedback Studio. Now this is another video in which we're exploring the different types of rubric that you can use in Feedback Studio. It may be that you've not used a rubric before or may not be sure about what we mean when we talk about a rubric, in which case it might be a good idea to look at the video on introducing rubrics before you continue with this video. Feedback Studio offers 4 different ways in which you can use rubrics. There's standard rubrics, which is the default rubric format, and it's designed to make the calculation of grades as standardized and systematic as possible. There's custom rubrics, which is like standard rubrics but offers a slightly more simplified and flexible scoring of assignments. Qualitative rubrics don't do any scoring at all, but enables you to simply use a structured set of feedback for each assessment. Grading forms are quick and simple to create and are probably the best compromise between those rubrics which determine grades for you and those that just provide feedback. Now, we have a separate video explaining each of these different rubrics, but for this video we're focusing on grading forms, so let's get started. As with all rubrics, creating a new one begins with the Rubric Manager. We can access the Rubric Manager either direct from the Moodle plugin, clicking on the little Lego brick icon next to the assignment details, or through the Rubrics panel in the assignment itself. Again, the same Lego brick icon to access the rubric panel, and then clicking on the cogwheel in the corner. You'll notice that these 2 different versions of the Rubric Manager look rather different from each other. The Moodle version retains the look and feel of the classic Turnitin, and the assignment version has the sparkly new Feedback Studio styling. Apart from the styling though, they both work in pretty much the same way. If you want to know more about the differences between them and the different options they provide, you can find out more about it on the video on creating rubrics. For this example, we're going to be using the Rubric Manager with the Feedback Studio styling, partly because it looks prettier, but mainly because, as you can see, in the Moodle version, the pop-up window is smaller, making it more difficult to see the whole rubric in one go. While in Feedback Studio versions, you get the whole window in one pop-up. Now, grading forms are rather like the VIP of rubrics because they have their very own menu in the Rubric Manager. To create a new grading form, simply go to the menu in the top left of the Rubric Manager and select Create New Grading Form. And as always, the first job is to give it a title. If you have already had a look at any of the other rubrics in Feedback Studio, or if you're familiar with using rubrics at all, then you might immediately notice that this one doesn't quite look the same as the others. It doesn't have the characteristic grid format, with the criterion running along one axis and the scales along the other. Here, we have 2 simple columns of information. The titles for the criteria on the left, and the description accompanying those criteria on the right. This is rather like the criteria column which you might see in the standard custom or qualitative rubrics. What is missing is the scales. We can describe the criteria themselves, but there is no breakdown of what those criteria might look like when performed really well or not very well at all. Grading forms leave the evaluation of those criteria up to the marker to decide on a case-by-case basis. So, let's see how it works. To demonstrate the grading form at work, I'm going to be using a rubric from a unit of problem solving. But of course you can adapt it any way you choose. This rubric has 4 criteria, which function pretty much in the same way that learning outcomes do. These criteria are identifying problems and factors relevant to problems, using these to formulate clear problem statements, using recognized problem-solving techniques to analyze problems in terms of root causes, developing possible solutions that address the root causes of a problem and that can evidence validity and reasoned rationale. And finally, identifying strategies for monitoring and evaluating solutions. Now, I've added these into the description boxes. I just need to create a simple title for each of them, say, identifying problems, using techniques, finding solutions, monitoring and evaluating. So, the rubric is pretty much ready to go. There is one option that you might want to think about before you attach it to the assignment. Up in the top right corner, there is a checkbox that allows you to either enable scoring or disable scoring. This scoring doesn't refer to the kind of automatic grading that you might find in the other rubric versions. It simply determines whether or not there'll be a space there in the criteria for you to provide your own grade next to each one. We'll leave this enabled for now so we can see what it looks like. But let's save this grading form and then use this slider at the bottom of the Rubric Manager to attach it to the assignment. Now, the Rubrics panel is showing in a rather neat and minimalistic way each of the 4 criteria or learning outcomes. If you click on any of those criteria, you can see the description showing up at the bottom of the rubric panel. Underneath each of the criteria is a box in which you can type your feedback. You will, in effect, be writing long-form feedback, but in relation to the specific criteria of the assignment task. This might include an assessment of the standard to which each assignment has achieved those intended outcomes. Just to the right of the criteria is the scoring box. In here, you can type a grade for each of the criteria. There are no limitations or impositions on how you score each one. You can type in pretty much any number you want. The one thing to remember, though, is that whatever numbers you add to these boxes will be added up to create an overall score. If you then apply this score to the assignment grade, it will then become a score determined out of 100. In this case, then, the grade will make no sense. To make it work, I would need to score each of the 4 criterion out of 25, so that when they are added up, the maximum possible score is 100, and the given score will work as a percentage. Of course, you might prefer not to bother with this at all, in which case it is easy enough to simply deactivate the scoring option. To do this, open again the Rubric Manager and unattach the rubric so that you can edit it. Now, check the scoring box and save the rubric. Reattach it and close. Now you can see that the scoring boxes have disappeared altogether. You have only to write in your feedback and, should you need, assign an overall grade for the assignment. As you are going through the rubric, you might find that you'd prefer to see each of the criteria and their descriptions all in one go, and you can do this by clicking on the little expansion icon in the top right of the Rubrics panel. This will open up the rubric in a pop-up window where you can see each of the criteria together with the feedback box. And you can complete the rubric while being able to see all the criteria together. So there we go. Grading forms, the VIP of rubrics, has the benefits of allowing much more control than other rubric forms. It certainly takes a lot less time to set up than those with scales, although this does mean that it takes more time to fill in when you're using it to provide feedback.